My name is Jason, and what I'm about to share happened to my sister, Sarah, about 5 years ago. At the time, she was single and occasionally used dating apps to meet people. As the older sibling, Sarah was fiercely independent and level-headed, but also cautious. That's what made the events of this night even more disturbing. It was a typical Friday evening. Sarah mentioned she had a date at a bar just a few blocks from her house. The man, who went by the name Mike, seemed friendly on the app. When she left, none of us were worried. This was something she did occasionally, and everything seemed normal. At the bar, Sarah arrived and texted Mike to let him know she was there. While waiting, an older man approached her. He had graying hair, a disheveled appearance, and a sour smell that matched his crumpled shirt. His smile was unsettling, marked by a crooked, yellowing front tooth. "Can I buy you a drink?" he asked, sitting down beside her. Sarah politely declined, explaining she was waiting for someone. But the man lingered, pressing her into conversation. With every comment he made, Sarah grew increasingly uncomfortable until she firmly asked him to leave. Reluctantly, he got up, but instead of leaving the bar, he chose a seat in the corner where he could still watch her. Sarah sent another message to Mike, urging him to hurry. His reply came a few minutes later. "Running late. Grab a drink while you wait." Something about the tone unsettled her, but she tried to brush it off. Meanwhile, the strange man returned, sitting beside her once more. His presence felt bolder, more intrusive. "So, where's your date?" he teased, flashing that same unsettling smile. Sarah tried to cut the interaction short, but his persistence had taken on a menacing edge. She sent a final message to Mike, telling him she was leaving. As she pressed send, she noticed something chilling. The man's phone, sitting on the bar beside him, lit up with a notification, the very text she had just sent. A wave of realization washed over her, leaving her frozen. She quickly fabricated an excuse to use the restroom, but slipped out the side exit instead. The man didn't follow her immediately. Shaken, Sarah called me and our other sister, Natalie, explaining what had happened. I told her to come straight to our house. When Sarah arrived and came inside, she mentioned seeing a car she thought had followed her into the neighborhood. Nervous, we checked the windows, but the car was gone. She recounted everything, and we tried to reassure her. For a while, it seemed the nightmare was over. We all went to bed, but the relief didn't last. Lying in her room, Sarah received another text from the same number. It read, "Sorry I missed you at the bar. What's your window? I want to see you." What happened next is something we'll never forget. Still trembling from the message, Sarah called Natalie into her room and showed her the phone screen. Both froze for a moment, trying to process how the man knew where she lived. As they debated what to do, Sarah felt a strange unease settle over her. The night had grown unnaturally silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then they heard a faint noise coming from the window. Something slid. Sarah's partially lowered blinds began to lift slowly. For a brief moment, both froze in terror, but when a stranger's hand pushed aside the curtain, they screamed in unison. The sound echoed through the house loud enough to wake the rest of the family. I was the first to burst into Sarah's room, closely followed by our parents. The window was already open, but the man had backed away. I rushed to the window and peered out. The street was dark, but I managed to spot a silhouette running toward a parked car across the road. The figure quickly got in, started the engine, and sped off. I tried to make out the license plate, but it was too dark. Meanwhile, our father ran outside with a baseball bat, but the man was already gone. We immediately called the police, recounting everything, from the incident at the bar to what had just happened. Sarah handed over the messages and the phone number the man had been using. When the police arrived, they asked a series of questions and provided guidance. They promised to investigate the number, but cautioned us that many people use apps to mask their identity. They also recommended reinforcing our home's security and keeping all doors and windows locked at all times. The next morning, we received a call from the police department. The number used by the man had been traced, but it belonged to a messaging app that didn't require real identification. They explained that tracking the individual further would be challenging without additional information. Though the man never reappeared, the incident left a lasting impact. Sarah was paranoid for weeks, and we all felt the need to improve our home's security. Our father installed new locks and surveillance cameras around the house. A few months later, we received a final update from the police. They hadn't been able to identify the man, but they uncovered similar reports of unsettling encounters involving the same tactics: a fake profile on dating apps, followed by stalking or attempted break-ins. This wasn't an isolated case. Since then, Sarah has completely abandoned dating apps. Although she's worked hard to move past the trauma, the experience left scars. To this day, she double-checks every lock on every window before going to bed, and our family has never looked at casual encounters the same way. This story still haunts us, but it taught us to be more cautious and vigilant. We'll never know what that man wanted or how far he was willing to go, but we're grateful Sarah escaped before something worse happened. And most importantly, she was never contacted by him again. I was nervous that night, but not in the way I had hoped. After months of trying to ease back into dating, I finally scheduled dinner with a woman named Kate, whom I'd met through an app. She seemed interesting, a little older than me, but there was something about her energy that made me curious. We arranged to meet at a small casual restaurant in town. I arrived a few minutes early and waited in my car, answering messages and listening to music. She texted to say she was having trouble finding the place, so I shared my location to help her. Shortly after, I saw an old car pull into the lot. When she stepped out, I realized it was Kate. We greeted each other briefly, but something about the initial interaction felt off. She declined a polite hug and walked straight into the restaurant without much conversation. I took a deep breath, trying not to let it throw me off. Inside, things only got more uncomfortable. Kate was different from how her photos portrayed her, older and visibly worn, as if life had weighed her down. I tried to make light conversation, but she responded with short, distracted sentences, her mind seemingly elsewhere. When the waiter came to take our order, she became noticeably uneasy, almost irritated. She only ordered water and declined my suggestion to share a glass of wine. Throughout dinner, the conversation stayed shallow and strained. I couldn't relax. Something about her presence felt unsettling. When the check arrived, there was no mention of splitting it. Reluctantly, I paid, and we stepped outside. She seemed hesitant to say goodbye, but I forced a smile, told her it had been a nice evening, and got into my car. Driving home, I felt a palpable relief. It was over. I arrived home, took off my coat, and began to unwind when the doorbell shattered the silence. Curious and confused, I looked out the window. There she was, Kate, standing at my door. My heart raced. How did she know where I lived? Then it hit me. I hadn't turned off the location sharing. A message buzzed on my phone. "I know you're there. Open the door." My blood ran cold. I ducked into the kitchen, keeping the lights off, hoping she'd leave. More messages followed. "You're not going to run from me like the others." The situation escalated when I heard the sound of shattering glass. She had broken one of my side windows. Fear gripped me as I bolted to my bedroom, locking the door and calling the police. While I explained the situation, I heard heavy footsteps approaching my room. "You shouldn't have ignored me," she shouted, pounding on the door. The operator instructed me to find something to defend myself with and ensure the door was secure. The wait for the police felt like an eternity, and the relentless banging on the door only amplified my panic. I clutched a heavy lamp, ready to defend myself if necessary, praying for the nightmare to end. Finally, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Relief washed over me as Kate screamed in frustration, and the pounding stopped. There was a moment of eerie silence before I heard the front door burst open. The police found her in the living room, clutching one of my kitchen knives. She was quickly subdued, handcuffed, and escorted out. I shakily explained everything to the officers, from the unsettling dinner to her breaking into my home. That night changed everything. I couldn't shake the image of her standing at my door or the sound of her voice behind the bedroom door. It's a night I'll never forget, one that left me questioning my trust in people and my safety in my own home. The day after the incident, the feeling of vulnerability clung to me like a shadow. Every sound seemed suspicious. Every flicker of movement made me look twice. Even with the police stepping in and removing Pamela, or rather Kate, from the situation, the unease remained. I spent the morning reinforcing the locks and windows of my apartment, but it didn't feel like enough to shake off the lingering fear. Every corner of my home seemed tainted by her presence. A few hours later, the police contacted me. They had taken Pamela into custody and were beginning to piece together her true identity. Her real name, background, and past behavior came to light. I learned that Pamela had a troubling history of stalking and obsessive behavior. A clear pattern emerged. She used dating apps to insinuate herself into the lives of her victims, only to obsessively pursue them afterward. It was like something out of a horror film, except it was terrifyingly real. The police also found a journal in her home, filled with detailed notes about me, my routines, habits, and even trivial things she had observed. There were entries noting the exact times I usually turned off my lights at night. Hearing that made my blood run cold. Pamela had been watching me from afar long before our first date. When the trial came, I was called to testify. Facing her again was unnerving but also revealing. She appeared almost remorseful in that setting, yet her eyes carried the same unsettling glint that had made me uneasy from the beginning. The prosecution laid out details of other victims, illustrating how her actions weren't an isolated lapse, but part of a deeply ingrained pattern of behavior. The sentence was clear. Pamela was convicted and sentenced to prison with mandatory psychiatric treatment. Knowing she was behind bars brought some relief, but the emotional toll of the experience was something only time could heal. Shortly after the trial, I moved to a new apartment in another city, hoping for a fresh start. While I never fully regained my sense of security, I slowly began to rebuild my peace of mind. Today I approach online dating with much greater caution. That night taught me that even the simplest encounters can carry unforeseen risks, and trusting your instincts is more important than ever. Pamela remains a stark reminder of how unpredictable the world can be, but also of the resilience it takes to overcome those moments and move forward. My name is Christopher, and this story took place 2 years ago, during a time when I was trying to rebuild my life after a difficult breakup. Back then, I decided to give dating apps a shot, knowing full well they didn't always deliver what they promised. That's how I met Amelia. She seemed friendly, had a captivating smile in her photos, and our conversations flowed well enough for me to feel comfortable inviting her over for dinner. A bold move, perhaps, but I thought a relaxed home setting would be better than a restaurant. The plan was simple. I'd cook penne alla vodka with garlic bread and open a bottle of wine. It was my go-to dish for making an impression, and truthfully, I was a bit nervous. It had been a while since my last date, and Amelia was the first person in a long time to genuinely seem interested. She arrived promptly at 6:30 p.m. My first impression was positive, though she seemed a bit more reserved than I had expected. She wore a simple dress and had a shy smile as she stepped through my front door. I did my best to make her feel comfortable, showing her the kitchen and suggesting she sit at the dining table while I finished preparing dinner. At first, our conversation was hesitant. I asked questions, tried to make her laugh with a few stories, but Amelia responded with short sentences and occasionally seemed distracted. Still, I pressed on. I offered her some wine, but she declined, asking for water instead. Then, nervously, she suggested we light a candle to make the atmosphere more special. I found the request a little odd, but went along with it, fetching a candle from the pantry. When I returned and lit the candle, I noticed something felt off. Amelia was seated again, but she seemed slightly unsettled, as if she had moved quickly moments before. I asked if everything was okay, and she smiled, saying she had just gone to the sink to wash her hands. I thought it was strange since I hadn't heard the faucet, but I brushed it off. Nerves get to everyone on a first date. Dinner was served, and Amelia began to relax. She listened attentively as I talked about my passion for cooking and my work. But as I raised my wine glass to make a toast, something caught my eye. Tiny granules floating in the liquid. It looked like powder. My mind raced, but I kept my composure. Feigning a sip, I set the glass down and didn't touch it again. After dinner, she excused herself to use the bathroom. As soon as she left the table, I took the opportunity to inspect the wine more closely. The smell seemed normal, but there was no denying the odd substance floating in it. My heart started pounding. Could she have put something in my drink? The thought seemed absurd, but my instincts told me otherwise. Amelia stayed in the bathroom for what felt like an eternity. When she returned, she said she needed to leave because her dog wasn't feeling well. I didn't question her, grateful to see the evening come to an end. I thanked her for coming and walked her to the door. She left, and I exhaled deeply, relieved but unsettled. Something about the night hadn't felt right, and my intuition was on high alert. Later that evening, as I sat in my bedroom trying to relax, I heard a noise from the kitchen. It sounded like something falling, a cup or a dish hitting the floor. I froze, my mind racing. I distinctly remembered locking every door and window after Amelia had left. Who could be in the kitchen? Grabbing my phone for light, I cautiously made my way toward the sound. As I stepped into the kitchen, my eyes scanned for any sign of movement. Everything seemed in place, until I noticed one of the back windows slightly ajar. My sense of security crumbled, and I realized then that the night was far from over. The open window felt like a punch to the gut. I was certain I'd closed it after Amelia left. The idea of someone breaking into my home sent my heart racing, and suddenly every sound was deafening. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves and think rationally. Grabbing a knife from the block on the counter, I kept my phone steady in the other hand. I took a cautious step back, convincing myself I might be overreacting. Maybe I had left the window unlocked without realizing it. But then a darker thought crossed my mind. What if Amelia had deliberately left the window unlatched before she left? It seemed absurd, but after seeing the suspicious substance in my wine, I couldn't rule anything out. As I slowly moved to check the other doors and windows, I heard a sound from the living room, a faint creak, like the floorboards shifting under weight. I froze, holding my breath, trying to pinpoint the direction of the noise. Then I saw it, a shadow shifting in the dim light. My blood ran cold. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling but loud enough to echo through the house. No response. Instead, a chill ran down my spine as the shadow moved again, closer to the hallway leading to my bedroom. I swallowed hard, taking silent steps in the opposite direction, trying to maintain as much distance as possible. I needed to call the police, but I'd have to get to my bedroom where the signal was stronger. As I crept down the hallway, a whisper cut through the silence. It was faint but unmistakable, and chilling. "Christopher." The voice was soft but carried a tone that sent shivers through me. At that moment, I knew. This wasn't a random break-in. It was personal. Amelia. It had to be her. I reached my bedroom and shut the door, locking it quickly. My heart pounded as I dialed 911, explaining the situation in hurried whispers. I told the operator someone was in my home, possibly armed. They assured me officers were on their way. While I waited, I heard footsteps outside the bedroom door. They stopped directly in front of it. Then the doorknob turned slowly but couldn't open. "Open the door, Chris," Amelia's voice whispered through the door. "I just want to talk." My eyes darted to the knife in my hand as every instinct screamed at me not to respond. "Go away, Amelia," I yelled, trying to sound braver than I felt. "The police are on their way." There was a heavy silence on the other side of the door. Then, the sound of something being dragged across the floor began. My heart felt like it might burst as I imagined what she might be doing. Frozen in place, I clung to the knife, the only thing grounding me in that moment of pure terror. Minutes later, I heard the distant sound of sirens. Relief surged through me. Amelia must have heard them too, because the dragging stopped and her footsteps retreated. Then came the sound of breaking glass. I rushed to the window and saw her fleeing through the backyard, disappearing into the darkness. Moments later, flashing blue and red lights filled the street as the police arrived. I unlocked the bedroom door and ran to meet the officers. I explained everything, and they searched the house. They found the back window broken and evidence that she had returned the knife to the kitchen before leaving. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but the experience was harrowing. A search was initiated, and Amelia was found later that night hiding in a nearby park, still wearing the same outfit from dinner. Amelia was arrested and charged with trespassing and attempted assault. I later learned she had a criminal history of obsessive and dangerous behavior with other men. I wasn't her first victim, and if not for quick action, I might not have been her last. After that night, I took drastic measures to secure my home. I installed new locks, reinforced my windows, and added security cameras. Still, the memory of Amelia calling my name through the door, the tension in her voice, and the sheer terror of being trapped in my own home lingered long after. I haven't trusted easily since. That night taught me to be cautious, to listen to my instincts, and to never let my guard down again. I can only hope I never encounter someone like her again.